And thanks very much indeed for talking to us. You've had your eye on some of those recovery proposals, particularly those of government and business. Why do you say that they've underplayed some critical challenges to get the economy working again?
Well, look, there's an absolute flurry of recovery strategies, but what we don't need are long laundry lists. What we do need is action. And we need to get some priorities very quickly. So we can't fix everything in South Africa at once. And we need to accept that the situation is so dire that South Africa has to do things differently. And one of the key issues is the business-government relationship. And are we going to free up firms to hire as many people as possible to survive this terrible economic situation and to start building a bridge to recovery? And in order to do that, we need to choose some priorities quickly, and we're not going to do this with long lists of all the millions of things that different groups in the economy think need to be fixed.
One of those priority areas, we've just seen a crucial document signed relating to the infrastructure fund this week. And the aim, of course, is to fund an infrastructure backlog and in doing so creating employment. I see you're not convinced that the aims of this drive are sharpened enough.
Well, everyone's in favor of infrastructure. It's like motherhood. But we have to peer behind this seeming consensus and ask some tough questions in order to get progress. So what kind of infrastructure are we going to go for? Is it mainly economic or social? We're going to have to get foreign funding to help fund this massive amount of infrastructure everybody wants. Well, we better make sure that we're getting the right infrastructure. We don't want any more Madupis. And we need to get infrastructure that delivers results for the economic growth so that we can pay back the loans. But we have to ask a fundamental question, which is, what are we going to do differently? Because for the last 12 years, everyone's talked about infrastructure, but nothing's happened. So we need to sharpen exactly what's going to be different from before and how we're going to move forward. Otherwise, I suspect, but hope not, that this is going to be a bit like the Jobs Summit. Lots of talk, lots of discussion, months and months of work, and we come up with something, the lowest common denominator, and then we get no results. So nothing really happens or changes. So you can't avoid some of the big issues facing South Africa by pretending we all agree on infrastructure. There are a lot more questions behind that seeming consensus.
One of the issues you point out is that crucial area around state capacity, Anne. I mean, to get some of those plans off the ground, you will need competence, you'll need state capacity. It's a crucial area. You argue this is not being urgently addressed and given the attention it deserves.
So a number of the recovery strategies, business, the ANC, the president, they all acknowledge, yes, state capacity is weak, we need some more capacity building. But the president, for example, has said he needs to focus on building a more competent, ethical state. I would argue one that understands how to manage markets. But he never tells us the precise steps in order to get there. We're going to have to deal with cadre deployment, with having all the wrong people for the job. We need a meritocratic state where we appoint black and white South Africans who actually have the expertise to do the jobs required. So that's critical. But what nobody wants to deal with in any of the documents really is what do we do tomorrow? Because rebuilding the state is going to take time. So what do we do in the meanwhile? How do we free up the private sector, which in many parts of our society is the only capacity we have? How do we free them up to work with a small group in government to make things happen? So it's not enough to just recognize the problems with state capacity. We have to now wrestle with a very difficult issue of who will implement the reforms if the state is weak and corrupt.
Before I let you go, I mean, some of those reforms you talk about, many regard them as low-hanging fruit. I'm talking about widening spectrum, lowering data costs, further relaxing visa rules, for example, for scarce skills, decisiveness on state-owned enterprises. So presumably that's the action you were talking about if you're going to fix or find a solution for tomorrow, as you say.
Well, personally, I would start in a different place. I think you've got to choose priorities. And my four would be, let's have emergency provisions to free up the economy, to protect firms, to help firms, to hire as many people as possible. So that's labor market reform and firms. Secondly, I would deal with the energy sector. Without energy, we will have no growth. Thirdly, I would implement immediate actions to get results on corruption. It's too slow. We need some senior people charged, tried, and in jail. And then lastly, we have some nearly 12 million people now who are unemployed. I think we need to look at the public works program. We probably need to reform them and think about how to expand this. So those would be my four priorities to start with. Let's deliver something. Let's get some progress, and then you'll build momentum for the next round of priorities.
All right, Anne Bernstein from the Centre for Development and Enterprise, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.